Let's bring in Democratic Congressman and former January 6th committee chair Benny Thompson. He joins us now. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for joining us. Your committee did extensive work on what happened on January 6th. Much of that was referred to the Justice Department. I haven't had the chance to speak with you, but as you've read through this indictment, what stuck out to you?
Well, a lot of it was the body of work our January 6th committee uncovered. We talked to people all over the country, election officials, people who conducted campaigns for the candidate, and without almost to the person, they indicated that they found no real fault. As you know, a lot of our witnesses were Republican officials, and they basically said, we reviewed it, we recounted, and we could find nothing wrong. The testimony from the Secretary of State of Georgia says the same thing. And so we put on a body of witnesses that we think presented the fact that former President Trump knew he had lost the election, but he also knew through his other people that there was nothing there that said the election was stolen.
Mr. Chairman, I want to ask you, too, about the thought that there could be a trial of the former commander-in-chief not far from where you work every day in the U.S. Capitol, at that courthouse, which is the intersection of Pennsylvania Avenue and Constitution Avenue. What will that be like? What will that mean for our country?
Well, I think it's part of how we test our system of democracy. No one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. It has nothing to do with the timing of the election. I believe that the Department of Justice looked at a lot of our work and added it to their body of work and determined that something had gone amiss. And in presenting the evidence to a grand jury, obviously that grand jury agreed. I don't feel good about the fact that a former president of the United States is going on trial, but I do feel good that our system of democracy works in that if you are found guilty of any charge or if you are accused of it, you have your day in court. Donald Trump is no different. I'm convinced, based on our review of the facts, that, as you know, we made some recommendations that we think he did do some things wrong. But we were not a prosecutorial body, and that's why what you see with the special counsel is the logical step to determine ultimately whether or not Donald Trump is guilty.
Benny Thompson, the congressman who chaired the committee and heard hundreds of hours of testimony from more than 1,000 people, and of course, turning over those findings to the Justice Department. Chairman Thompson, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Nancy Cordes, you covered Capitol Hill. Now you're the chief White House correspondent. I mean, they did a lot. That committee did a lot of work, extensive work that we all covered here on CBS News and watched a lot of that evidence and testimony.
And it is hard to overstate how influential the findings of that committee were and how much influence they have had on this indictment that we're looking at right now. You know, this case was kind of in limbo at DOJ a couple of years after January 6th took place. It's not hard to see why. It was a novel case. Nothing like this had ever happened before. It was totally unprecedented legally, and of course it was politically fraught. But then the January 6th committee did the Herculean work of interviewing all of these people, some of them for the first time, putting together this compelling narrative and then saying to DOJ, and here are the criminal statutes that we believe you could pursue. And they sort of tied it up in a neat bow in a way that had not been done before. And what's the result? It's the indictment that you see this week.
To build on what Nancy just said, perhaps the most important thing Chairman Thompson's committee did is it brought Trump to the center of the story in terms of making him, in their view, the mastermind of this conspiracy. Recall what happened in the days after the Capitol attack. Democrats in the House and some Republicans mounted an impeachment process against Trump, and they impeached him. And they impeached him for inciting a riot. It was about Trump's conduct during the day of the Capitol attack. What was the first subpoena issued by the January 6th committee? It came in September of 2021, and it was about phone calls Trump was making to Giuliani and others from the White House on January 5th. What the committee uncovered through its reporting, through its interviews, is that Trump was driving this, not reacting to a rally. Trump was pushing this into motion.
And we saw that with the tweets, of course, that are outlined not only in the indictment that we're familiar with as well, the continued invitation to his supporters to come to Washington to not only stop the steal, but in his words, to essentially rally against this.
It's going to be wild.
It's going to be wild. Thank you very much. It's going to be wild. Yes.
Two other things from the January 6th committee. We've talked about it before, but it bears repeating, which is so much of the testimony came from people who were in the room and as close to the president as possible. And the January 6th committee put all that out there so that this wasn't just hearsay. This is people who were fact witnesses in the moment. It also cracked open some things. Remember, there was that fight over John Eastman's emails. And in that course of that, the U.S. District Judge David Carter looked at those emails and found that in one filing in Georgia on December 4th, that John Eastman said, wait a minute, we can't say that this many votes were for dead people. It turns out that's not true. But then they went ahead and said it anyway. Why is that important? Because one of the things at issue is whether the president knew that what he was saying was false and went ahead and said it anyway. And that was cracked open by the activities of the January 6th committee. Also true, Vice President Pence's lawyer, who testifies to the fact that the president was told by John Eastman that the scheme actually wasn't lawful. Again, to the heart of the special counsel's case.
So not only did he know that he lost the election, he knew that the claims that he was making were also false and made them anyway.
And engaged in a conspiracy anyway.
And the conspiracy was put on paper. It was John Eastman wrote a 2-page memo. And I remember when Bob Woodward and I found this memo, authored by John Eastman, it almost seemed unreal that this was put into paper, memorialized for history. The final point, the main thing here, Eastman writes to Republicans in Congress and Trump, is that Pence should do all of this without asking for permission.